And now, the fabulously fabulous, marvelously marvelous, wonderfully wonderful science fiction theater of the imagination proudly presents Extreme Gravity, the new radio play written by J.D. Evans Jr., starring Elvis D. Tripp and his traveling troupe of strange voices, and featuring the musical stylings of Milford Whittle and his finger puppet marching band, with sua sponte silly announcements by Warfel the Potato. We continue with Chapter 4, The Company Man Arrives on the Asteroid. As best as Sai could determine, Bakra and Suzanne reappeared just as quickly as they had disappeared. Except for a slight flickering effect, it was as if nothing had happened. But Sai knew better. Sai continued the total spectrum recording, continued the personnel movement macro, and was already reviewing possible solutions to the problem of clandestinely acquiring a drost as soon as possible. If there was another world, then Sai was going to find a way to study it. Probability 0.995. No sooner had they arrived than Suzanne quickly scanned the area, observed it was empty, and said, Sai, secure, priority, saber. Act, instruct. Stop recording. Act. Archive under another world. Saber. Act. Bakra added, we will review the recording later. Act. Bakra looked at Suzanne and said, anything else? Suzanne shook her head, and Bakra said, Sai, erase this conversation. Act. Bakra then started walking to the command room to see how things were going with Officer Strap Williams, DRN. Suzanne said, see you later, and headed for her cabin where she planned to begin reviewing the total spectrum recording and then to get some long overdue sleep. In the command room, Strap was enjoying his second cup of coffee, Bakra's Kenya AAA from Earth, and was wondering why company directors preferred to travel in unescorted Dream 9 courier ships when visiting border projects. Being a physical did not help Strap understand braino mentality, but he was too fascinated by the concept of being nothing more than a human brain living within a classic sphere not to wonder about everything the brainos did. In the previous millennia, there had been so many advances that understanding them in great detail was nearly impossible for most people. Solving the unified field theory, discovering how to make transparent armored steel, and advances in biomedical technology, microsurgery, and longevity had made it possible to extend the human lifespan by removing the brain from a worn-out or diseased body and then putting it into a completely self-contained spherical life support system. The life support spheres were made of mirrored glass, transparent armored steel, and were about 500 millimeters in diameter. In addition to having an advanced biomedical support system, the spheres contained a complete perceptual interface, a gravity-controlled motion system, and an elaborate weapon system. Put another way, each classic sphere was a miniature spaceship piloted by the brain that lived within it. Physicals, humans who still had bodies, called the people who abandoned their bodies and lived within classic spheres brainos, although not when any brainos were present. The fact that the brainos had very powerful gravity-controlled motion systems made it possible for them to travel quickly anywhere in the universe. So Strap was wondering why company directors, who were all brainos, chose to travel in unescorted Dream 9 courier ships when visiting border projects. Perhaps it was because traveling in courier ships gave the brainos a greater sense of physical presence. More likely it was because the brainos were addicted to the courier ship's virtual reality simulators. Space travel might be boring, but the virtual reality simulators gave the concept of not boring a new and almost dangerous definition. Since it was nearly impossible to destroy an alert Braino, attacking a courier ship at a time when the Braino was not so alert, due to being preoccupied with the virtual reality simulator, was one of the few easy ways to eliminate a Braino. Nevertheless, it was not destroying the courier ship that eliminated the Braino. Rather, it was the collapse of the courier ship's gravity drive that eliminated the Braino. Because when a gravity drive collapsed, everything within the general vicinity, about a kilometer or so, also collapsed. Nobody actually knew precisely what happened to the material within a gravity drive's collapse envelope, but since none of it had ever been observed to appear anywhere else, everyone presumed it was gone. Strap was just beginning to wonder if there were a lot of Brainos stuck in some kind of anti-gravity universe when Bakra walked into the command room and said, "Strap, what's the status of the Dream 9 courier ship?" Strap quickly punched a series of buttons on the monitor console, and a holographic representation of near space showing the location of the Dream 9 courier ship in relation to the asteroid appeared. Then Strap said, "Psi has been monitoring the courier ship, and there are no problems. Psi, Ack? Bakra replied, "Great. We don't need any problems with this visit. It's about 6 hours until Cavance arrives, and I want everything to be ready for his arrival. Is this coffee fresh?" Strap held up his coffee cup and said, "I'm just finishing my second cup. There are a few more cups left." Bakra went into the command room's small galley and remarked, "This antique coffee machine I got the last time I was on Earth sure does a nice job. You would think that after several centuries someone would put a decent coffee machine in the galleys, but it hasn't happened." As Bakra was filling his cup of coffee, a raspy, metallic-sounding voice broke the silence in the command room. "Attention, Dream 9 project ship. Director Cavance, DRN, wishes to speak to the commander. Act." Observing that Bakra was nearly halfway to the command console and that Strap was a bit startled, Psi quickly responded, "Act," and replaced the broadcast image of the command room with a simulation showing Bakra and Strap attentively awaiting communication from Director Cavance, DRN. As Cavance appeared on the monitor, Bakra and Strap rushed to the position Psi illuminated for them and prepared for the transition from simulation to reality. Psi could be very useful at times. The transition was announced with a single bell tone, heard only by Bakra and Strap, just as Cavance began speaking. "Bakra, good to see you again. I shall be occupied for the next few hours, so I expect you to monitor my ship carefully until I arrive. My safety override code is Zlonix Ack. Bakra looked at the mirrored classic sphere floating in the monitor and replied, "Yes, sir. Is there anything else I can do for you?" Cavance's image moved closer in the monitor to Bakra and then said, "Yes, I'm traveling with a companion. Director Marcellus gave her to me as a reward for completing the project on Arbel, and I want you to prepare accommodations for two. I am enjoying her thoughts immensely. She is mine for 2 years as a result of an indiscretion she committed in the presence of the Imperial Director, and I intend fully to enjoy her thoughts. Do not disturb me except in case of an attack." Bakra replied with a perfunctory, "Yes, sir." Then the monitor screen went momentarily blank and subsequently transformed into the holographic simulation of near space. While Bakra was not happy to learn of Cavance's companion, perhaps toy was a better word, at least for the next 2 years, he was very pleased about the likelihood of Cavance being preoccupied with his companion. Fewer questions and less chance of Cavance learning anything about the Drosts in another world. Bakra looked at Strap, thought out loud, "Brainos," more in disgust than as a question, and then said, "Psi, secure priority DRN. Act, instruct. Monitor the Dream 9 courier ship at the highest level and locate Cavance's companion safety override code. We're not going to lose any directors, indiscreet or otherwise, on my watch. Her safety override code should be in the Directorate Court's indiscretion records. So begin looking in the award notices for Director Marcellus to get an approximate time for her sentencing. Act. Knowing the safety override code for a Braino traveling in a courier ship was important because if there were an attack, the safety override code could be used remotely to control all of the Braino's systems. Since the Thalassic sphere was armored, enhanced with the capability of rapid, gravitationally powered movement, and equipped with an elaborate weaponry system, being able to control it remotely transformed the Braino into a formidable defensive and offensive system. If nothing else could be done, the Braino could be ordered to blast its way out of the courier ship, and then to move a safe distance away from any immediate danger. It was even possible to put the brain into stasis and then to guide the Braino through space at near light speed. But anything done remotely required the Braino's safety override code, SOC. The fact that Cavans gave his safety override code was a complete statement of trust in Bakra, Strap, and Psi. Not giving his companion safety override code was a different kind of statement, but Bakra was taking action to correct that. After her indenture was completed, Cavant's companion would return to being a powerful company director, and it was in Bakra's long-term interest to ensure her safety. Considering that her offense was only committing an indiscretion in the presence of the Imperial Director, it was likely that Cavants had done something to ensure her safety, if for no other reason than the fact that he enjoyed having her as a plaything. But Bakra had to be more careful because Brainos were a bit illogical at times, and what was an omission for a Braino could be considered a crime when overlooked by a physical. Bakra was taking no chances. In a few moments, Psi notified Bakra that it had located Cavant's companion's safety override code. Bakra, secure priority DRM. Ack, what's up? Cavant's companion is Director Darla Trivet, and her safety override code is Velika. Her indiscretion was to refer to Director Marcellus as a Braino in the presence of the Imperial Director. Giving her to an underling was considered to be sufficient punishment by the other directors. Ack! I don't want any problems, Ack. Ack! Bakra stayed in the command room for a few more minutes and finished his cup of coffee. Strap was busily monitoring the Dream 9 courier ship and its progress to near space. Observing that everything was under control, Bakra told Strap, "I'm going to get some sleep. See you at 0630. Wake me if anything happens." Strap replied, "Roger," and then Bakra left the command room and went to his cabin. After spending a few more minutes monitoring the courier ship's progress in near space, Strap decided he had looked busy for long enough and invited Psi to play a game of space chess. Meanwhile, in near space, Director Cavans was beginning to play another kind of game. Through his less than reputable Arvelian merchant contacts, Cavans had obtained some illegal Braino perceptual modification equipment, and using his companion's safety override code, had altered her aversion to participating in certain kinds of virtual reality simulation. Specifically, Cavans had used the illegal equipment to identify the types of virtual reality simulation experiences that most repelled and excited his companion. Now, with help from the illegal equipment and a bit of innovative interfacing of his own, Cavans could taste her most extreme sensations, both of pleasure and of pain, when she reacted to his carefully orchestrated virtual reality simulations. For the first century or two, Cavans had missed his body, but after discovering his capacity for tasting the perceptions of other Brainos, he had long since stopped regretting having abandoned his body. The human mind is a wonderfully exciting and deeply mysterious thing, and now that Cavans had attained sufficient status and power to enable him to have a female director for his plaything, he was most pleased. He could not kill her, and in fact did not want to do anything that would permanently damage her, but he could and would taste her more fully than any Braino or physical before, and for the next 2 years she could not refuse him. If he was careful in his tasting and training, perhaps she would desire to continue to be his personal plaything when her indenture was completed. Her voluntary submission to his control would likely be sufficient proof of his personal power for the Imperial Director to promote him to full Director status, something that would then make it possible for him to obtain more playthings. While Strap and Cavins were playing their own versions of not-so-dissimilar games, Suzanne was reviewing Psy's total spectrum recording of the Step Into and Return From Another World. When played back slowly, she could see a clearly formed window opening and closing. Although she had not noticed it at the time, the window appeared to have a control panel, more like a series of colored buttons, located along its top edge. The top edge of the window was too high for any human to reach, so Suzanne speculated that it had been designed for use by other life forms, or perhaps by machines. By adjusting the perspective of the recording, she viewed the window from the side and observed that it was no thicker than a simple molecule. When she rotated the perspective so she could see the back of the window, she saw nothing except the far wall of the forward observation deck. For all practical purposes, the window was invisible to anything behind it, and she made a note to get more data on the possibility of using drosts as cloaking devices. Suzanne continued studying the recording until 0300, and then went to sleep. In another part of the ship, Bakra suddenly awoke from a dream in which he was a butterfly in a field of mirrored flowers to the piercing sound of the command room alarm. As captain, Bakra heard the command room alarm no matter where he was in the ship. Not wasting any time, Bakra jumped out of bed and into the blue light that identified the opening of the tube leading from his cabin to the command room, and almost as quickly found himself standing directly in back of the now very busy Officer Strap Williams, DRM. Bakra looked at the holographic near-space simulation on the monitor and said, "Status." Strap, who was busily punching the buttons that activated and controlled several other display monitors, replied, "Two ships, unknown origin, closing in on Cavan's courier ship. ETA to attack is approximately 45 seconds, counting. Cavans is not responding to imminent danger broadcast, any frequency." Without giving the matter much thought, Bakra quickly shouted, "Psi, secure priority, DRN, act, instruct. Cavans, SOC, Zlonix, Trivet, SOC, Belika, full stasis, arm weapons, transport them immediately to the forward dock, OMA, act, act." Within seconds, a new trajectory moving rapidly from the courier ship to the asteroid appeared in the holographic near-space simulation. Strap punched a few more buttons and a stasis display showing everything normal for Cavans and his companion appeared. The two ships of unknown origin continued moving toward the courier ship. In a few more seconds, the arrival tone sounded, and Strap punched up the forward deck monitor, which now showed two classic spheres. Strap said, "Psi, move them to Biomed and give me a status on them. Act, act." Bakra continued looking at the two unidentified ships approaching the courier ship and then directed Strap's attention to the display by pointing at it. "Look at that. I don't think they noticed we transported the Branos. Let's see what happens next." Strap punched a few more buttons, and the display zoomed in to the vicinity surrounding the courier ship. When the two unidentified ships reached attack proximity, they each fired 3 light missiles, and in less than a second, there was a series of big flashes, followed by the expected gravity drive collapse. And then the display showed nothing. No courier ship, and no attack ships. All gone. Bakra patted Strap on the back and said, "Send the standard message to Dream 9 Command. Inform them that Director Cavan's ship was attacked and destroyed, and request immediate military support. Not that we need it. While you're doing that, I'm going to change clothes and then see how our newly arrived guests are doing. Good work." Strap punched a few more buttons, and Bakra began walking to his cabin in no particular hurry. It would take Biomed about 15 minutes to remove the Branos from full stasis, and that would give Bakra plenty of time to collect his thoughts. Suzanne was still dreaming, but occasionally drifted into and out of a dream in which she was a field of flowers and Bakra was a butterfly. And thus ends the 4th chapter of Extreme Gravity. The company man arrives on the asteroid. The new radio play written by J.D. Evans Jr., starring Elvis D. Tripp. and featuring the musical stylings of Milford Whittle and his finger puppet marching band, with sua sponte, silly announcements by Warfel the Potato. Stay tuned for the next chapter in Extreme Gravity, Sinister Visitors in the Abandoned City. This has been presented to you by the fabulously fabulous, marvelously marvelous, wonderfully wonderful science fiction theater of the imagination. I'm Warfel the Potato. Good night.